Chapter 4 It's All Chew Toys to Them. Empathy 101. Imagine you live on a planet where the dominant species is far more intellectually sophisticated than human beings, but often keeps humans as companion animals. They are called the Gorns. They communicate with each other via a complex combination of telepathy, eye movements, and high-pitched squeaks, all completely unintelligible and unlearnable by humans, whose brains are prepared for verbal language acquisition only. What humans sometimes learn is the meaning of the individual sounds by repeated association with things of relevance to them. The Gorns and humans bond strongly, but there are many Gorn rules which humans must try to assimilate with limited information and usually high stakes. You are one of the lucky humans who lives with the Gorns in their dwelling. Many other humans are chained to small cabanas in the yard. They have become so socially starved that they cannot control their emotions when a Gorn goes near them. Because of this behavior, the Gorn agrees that they could never be house humans. They are too excitable. The dwelling you share with your Gorn family is filled with numerous water-filled porcelain bowls, complete with flushers. Every time you try to urinate in one, though, any nearby Gorn attacks you. You learn to only use the toilet when there are no Gorns present. Sometimes they come home and stuff your head down the toilet for no apparent reason. You hate this and start sucking up to the Gorns when they come home to try and stave this off, but they view this as increasing evidence of your guilt in some unknown act. You are also punished for watching videos, reading certain books, talking to other human beings, eating pizza or cheesecake, and writing letters. These are all considered behavior problems by the Gorns. To avoid going crazy, once again, you wait until they are not around to try doing anything you wish to do. While they are around, you sit quietly staring straight ahead. Because they witness this good behavior you are so obviously capable of, they attribute to spite the video watching and other transgressions which occur when you are alone. Obviously, you resent being left alone, they figure. You are walked several times a day and left crossword puzzles to do. You have never used them because you hate crosswords. The Gorn thinks you're ignoring them out of revenge. Worst of all, you like them. They are, after all, often nice to you. But when you smile at them, they punish you, likewise for shaking hands. If you apologize, they punish you again. You have not seen another human since you were a small child. When you see one on the street, you are curious, excited, and sometimes afraid. You really don't know how to act. So the Gorn you live with keeps you away from other humans. Your social skills never develop. Finally, you are brought to training school. A large part of your training consists of having your air briefly cut off by a metal chain around your neck. They are sure you understand every squeak and telepathic communication they make because you sometimes seem to get it right. You are guessing and hate the training. You feel pretty stressed out a lot of the time. One day you see a Gorn approaching with the training collar in hand. You have PMS, a sore neck, and you just don't feel up to the baffling corrosion about to ensue. You tell them in your sternest voice to please leave you alone and go away. The Gorns are shocked by this unprovoked aggressive behavior. They thought you had a good temperament. They put you in one of their vehicles and take you for a drive. You watch the attractive planetary landscape going by and wonder where you are going. The vehicle stops and you are led into a building filled with the smell of human sweat and excrement. Humans are everywhere in small cages. Some are nervous, some depressed. Most watch the goings-on from their prisons. Your Gorns, with whom you have lived with your entire life, hand you over to strangers who drag you to a small room. You are terrified and yell for your Gorn family to help you. They turn and walk out the door of the building. You are held down and given a lethal injection. It is, after all, the humane way to do it. Top 10 behavior problems of pet humans on planet Gorn. 1. Smiling. 2. Watching TV. 3. Use of porcelain bowls filled with water as elimination sites. 4. Listening to music other than country and western. 5. Talking to other humans. 6. Smoking. 7. Toothbrushing. 8. Eating anything but nutritionally balanced human chow. 9. Shaking hands to greet. 10. Sitting on chairs. How can I get him to stop sitting on chairs? This nightmarish world is the one inhabited by many domestic dogs all the time. Virtually all natural dog behaviors, chewing, barking, rough play, chasing moving objects, eating any available food item within reach, jumping up and pawing to greet, settling minor disputes with threat displays, establishing contact with strange dogs, guarding resources, leaning into steady pressure against their chest or necks, urinating on porous surfaces like carpets, defending themselves from perceived threats, are considered by humans to be behavior problems. The rules which seem so obvious to us make absolutely no sense to dogs. They are not humans in dog suits. If someone tried to punish our behaviors you knew were necessary for maintaining your well-being or earning a living, would you cease doing them altogether, or would you try to figure out when it is safe to do them and when it wasn't safe? How would you feel about the punisher? What kind of credibility would he have? It is as inherently obvious to dogs that furniture, clothing, and car interiors are good for chewing as it is inherently obvious to you that TV sets are good for watching. If I reprimand you for watching the TV, your most likely course of action is simply watch TV when I'm not around, and you're large-brained, conscious Latin human. We smart, moral beings do this kind of discriminating all the time. Take speeding on highways. A lot of people have had tickets. What's the actual effect of this hefty, perfectly timed punishment? An immediate suppression of the behavior. You slow down right after you get the ticket. You're angry and upset. But what happens over the next few hours, days, and weeks? Most people start speeding again, and they will tell you that they fully understand that speeding is against the law, that it is potentially very dangerous, and that they understand the penalty if they are caught. Those last 4 words are the key, if they are caught. What you typically get with punishment is finer discrimination. You get better at smelling out speed traps, at knowing where and when you can speed. It's very important to understand that this is not a moral failing, just the result that is obtained with punishment. We are subject to the laws of learning. Dogs are even more so because they don't have the understanding of the behavior being wrong or potentially harmful as we do. In other words, they never self-punish the way we do with guilt and self-recrimination. This doesn't make them morally inferior. It's just how they are. We take far too personally phenomena which are simply products of animal learning laws. Similarly, burning your mouth on pizza makes you check the temperature of the pizza next time before digging in, but doesn't stop you from ordering it again. This is because pizza tastes good, and you know this. An organism will always look for a way around the punishment to get to the reward, if there is one. Rewards drive behavior ultimately. Punishments are just obstacles to overcome on the way to the reward. Likewise, a dog will rarely find it wrong or quit cold turkey his habits of digging in the azaleas, although he may learn it's dangerous to do so when you're there. What else could a flower bed possibly be for to a dog? Whenever you punish, you're the cop, giving out a speeding ticket to a not very sophisticated and immoral being who really wants and maybe even needs to speed. Oh, he'll stop for a while. It's the fine is hefty. But he'll sooner or later be back to speeding, and he'll be better at avoiding speed traps. Division of matter in the universe. Furniture is a chew toy to dogs. Footwear is a chew toy to dogs. Cars are rapidly retreating objects to dogs. Car interiors are chew toys. Carpets are toilets. Dog food is just food. Hours devours for guests is just food. Kleenexes are food. A cello is a chew toy. A book is also a chew toy. Cats and squirrels are rapidly retreating objects. Plastic wrap on the ground is just food. Hi-fi speakers are chew toys. Hi-fi speakers are toilets to intact males. Eyeglasses are chew toys. And rocks are food. House training. House training is another classic example. Remember the Gorns? If one of them leapt out of the bathroom cupboard and yelled at you every time you sat on the toilet to defecate, it would still feel pretty obvious that toilets were the right place to go to the bathroom. You may, however, start checking the cupboards before going to make sure the attacker wasn't there. You would also be pretty reluctant to defecate in any other location if you know who was standing around. This isn't spite. It's immensely sensible. Owners see dogs who refuse to eliminate on walks and then go on the carpet when the owner leaves the room to answer the phone as getting back at them. It's got to be the goofiest misreadings of dogs going. The dog has simply learned to go to the bathroom on an obvious toilet when the attacker is not present. He behaves obsequiously on the owner's return to try and turn off the punishment, which inevitably occurs when the magic context cues, owner plus poop on rug, are present. It is clear from his terrified, submissive posture that the dog would dearly love to avoid that punishment if only he knew how. If someone punished you in a certain circumstance, you would beg for mercy too, regardless of whether you had any clues as to why they were about to punish you. It's borderline Orwellian what we do to dogs. The reason owners are stymied by the house training process is that it is too inherently obvious to them that the indoors-outdoors discrimination is the name of the game. Dogs, on the other hand, although capable of making this discrimination, don't necessarily leap to that conclusion based on the information provided by the owner. Owners also assume that the dog can learn right from wrong when what he really learns is safe, dangerous. When a dog is learning how the world works, there are many different pieces of the puzzle to assimilate. Let's look at a typical house training effort, the first 12 urination attempts of Max, a newly adopted dog. 1. Max urinates in the hall. The context clues was that there was a braided rug, the owner was absent, and the result to Max was bladder relief. 2. Max urinates in the living room. There was a thick carpet, and the owner was present. Result to Max was yelling and a scruff shake. 3. Max urinates in the yard. There was grass, and the owner was present. Result to Max was relief, praise, and a cookie. 4. Max urinates in the living room. There was thick carpet, and the owner was present. Result to Max was yelling and a scruff shake. 5. Max urinates in the hall. There was a braided rug, and the owner was present. Result to Max was yelling and a scruff shake. 6. Max took a trip to the yard, where he did not urinate. There was grass, the owner was present. Result to Max was that he was taken back inside. 7. Max urinates in the yard. There was grass, but the owner was absent. Result to Max was relief. 8. Max urinates in the bedroom. There was thick carpet, the owner was present, and result to Max was yelling scruff shake. 9. Max urinates in the dining room. He was under the table, and the owner was absent. Result to Max was relief. 10. Max urinates in the dining room. There was a rug in the corner, and the owner was present. Result to Max was yelling and a scruff shake. 11. Max took a trip to the yard, where he did not urinate. There was grass, and the owner was present. Result to Max was that he was taken back in. 12. Max urinates in the basement. There was a sofa, and the owner was absent. Result to Max was relief. From the owner's perspective, there were only 3 mistakes. The first one in the hall, the one under the dining room table, and the one in the basement. All the other attempts were caught and punished or occurred in the desired location, the yard. But what has the dog learned? It's possible that the dog is learning that all indoor locations are dangerous and that the grass is safe. It's equally possible that the dog is learning that bedrooms and living rooms are dangerous, dining rooms are dangerous if you're not under a table, and grass, sofas, and basements are so far safe. The one sure thing is that it is never dangerous when the owner is absent, and dangerous almost half the time when the owner is present. If you were the dog and had to play the odds, you might start holding on when the owner was with you, including in the yard, and then nipping down to the basement to pee in order to play it safe. Your hypothesis would be proven correct. It is always safe to go when you're alone. What's missing from this house training example is a solid history of rewarded trials in the desired location, the yard. This not only removes ambiguity from early attempts, but also establishes both the owner's presence and the location as rewarding. Subsequent punishments will therefore have a narrower possible interpretation. The location must be unsafe. This solid foundation is usually missing. Owners start to assume learning after 2 or 3 correct trials, which is only a drop in the bucket. To guarantee success in house training, all that is required is for each and every performance by the dog be caught and given feedback. That's Rule 1. Rule 2 is that the owner needs and wants to be the good guy most of the time. To give feedback every time and be the good guy, you must arrange for elimination to occur outside. You must be present when the dog performs outside so you can supply the well-timed reward, praise and treat from pocket. You also need a way to prevent any mistakes. Each and every instance of elimination which is prevented inside the house is one saved up for the right place, outside. Another opportunity to condition outside elimination through reward and be the good guy at the same time. This is the major thrust of house training. The minor addendum in house training is to catch mistakes indoors with well-timed interruptions. Crate training. To get an uninterrupted reward history, the dog has to be prevented from even attempting urinating in the house. This can be achieved using a dog crate and frequent trips outdoors at likely times. Most dogs will do their utmost to hold on and not eliminate if closely confined. This makes the crate a valuable tool. Reams of material exist on the subject of crate training. It's astounding that the concept is still resisted in the name of being humane. The alternative to crate training is a possible early punishment history that will not only stress the dog but may derail the whole process. People get the job done in other ways, but the wear and tear on the dog is considerable. Before using a crate as a training tool, take the time to make a good first impression. Make it comfy with a nice crate pad or pillow and a blanket. Situated in a high-traffic area like the kitchen, and whenever the dog isn't looking, drop a couple of treats at the back. Let the dog discover the wonders at the back of the crate on his own. Feed him meals in there, always with the door open. Using heavy string, tie an attractive stuffed chew toy to the rear inside so that the dog must lie in the crate in order to chew on it. After a few days of this, start teaching the dog to enter and exit on command. Say, into bed, or into the crate. Throw in a treat, praise as the dog goes in and eats the treat, and then order him out with the command of your choice. Encourage him to come out, and when he does, praise him. No food treat for exiting. Repeat this a few times and then change the order of events slightly. Instead of throwing the treat into the crate after you say into bed, wait for him to go in on his own before dropping in the treat. If the dog doesn't enter on command, simply wait. Do not command him a second time, and do not crack and throw the treat in. You can encourage him in with hand gestures, but even this is riskier than simply waiting. If he doesn't go in, end the training session without comment. Try another session in a little while, still withholding the reward until the dog goes in on his own. When he does, and they all do eventually, so hang in there, give him a double or triple reward. Do a few more rewarded reps and then end the session. Always leave the dog wanting more. When the dog is going in and out on command, you are ready to try the first lock-in. Rent yourself a favorite video and stuff a couple of chew toys with something extra special. Set the crate up right next to your comfy movie chair, and just before you sit down to enjoy the movie, order the dog into the crate. When he goes in, give him the chew toys, close the crate door, and start the movie. Leave a few times to get popcorn, a drink, but always come back within a minute or so. The first experience being locked in the crate must be an overwhelmingly easy and good one. Any noise, agitation, or tantrum from the dog can either be ignored or reprimanded. At the end of the movie, if the dog is quiet and settled in the crate, simply open the door and order him out. Under no circumstances will you open the door to the crate if the dog is misbehaving, otherwise you are conditioning that behavior. If you do not like it, do not reward it. When you do open the door, don't gush and hug the dog. Make the exit an anticlimax. Behave very neutrally. All the good stuff should happen while he's in the crate, behaving nicely. Once he's out, order him right back in for a food treat or two without closing the door before you finish your training movie session. If he refuses to go in, do whatever it takes to get him in. Reward him and get your in/out exercise polished up again. Now spend a few days locking the dog in the crate when you're at home, going about your usual business. Ignore, reprimand any noise, and provide interesting crate puzzles, like chew toys, each time. When the dog is going in without fuss and no longer distress vocalization, you may start leaving the house. Voila! Crate training. There are dogs who are not inhibited by crates. They merely urinate and defecate. They may have early histories of being caged for long periods, forcing them to eventually eliminate. They lose their cleanliness instinct. Sometimes it can be nursed back by keeping the crate and dog immaculate and getting them out often enough so they never get close to being full and thus eliminating in the crate. For dogs who continue to eliminate without reserve when closely confined, the crate is less valuable. The principles of the house training are the same. However, arrange for a lot of right responses and reward each one. Interrupt wrong responses. For crate impervious dogs, this means close supervision. Develop the ability to distinguish and keep track of empty versus full dog. Freedom in limited dog-proofed areas of the house can be granted at empty periods. In other words, you have just witnessed and rewarded the dog for doing both functions outdoors, so you know you're safe for a short while. Full dogs has two choices. 1, in his crate, or 2, outside at the elimination area with his owner who has liver in pocket in case the dog guesses right and performs. You must time the reward perfectly. House training procedure. 1. Establish a reward history by taking the dog out to the same place at frequent intervals and rewarding with both praise and a food treat, all elimination in that spot. The reward must be in your pocket so that you can give it within 1 second of his performance. Praise as he's going and reward immediately after. Use a reward the dog really, really likes. In order to reward immediately, you must be present. Sending the dog into the yard through the back door while you watch from the window may result in a dog peeing or pooping in the yard, but there is no training effect without the immediate reward. You are setting the dog up to prefer going out of your presence. Remember, you will later be reprimanding the dog for going inside, and you don't want him to associate that with you. The dozens of times he has been rewarded for going in front of you while outside will make your subsequent reprimand easier to interpret. You may also reward the dog by taking him for a walk after he has eliminated in the toilet area. When he learns that the walk starts after he eliminates, he will tend to eliminate more quickly. Most people train this backwards. They walk the dog in hopes of getting him to eliminate and then end the walk, taking the dog directly home as soon as he is empty. The dog learns that eliminating ends walks and starts to delay going to the bathroom in order to extend the walk. This is not a plot by the dog, simply the laws of learning in action again. In my house, the rule is, empty dogs play frisbee. The dogs like frisbee and know the game doesn't start till they are empty, so they empty themselves with a fair amount of urgency. Most dog owners should learn to focus more on providing consequences than on trying to manipulate behavior with elicitors. More on consequences and elicitors later. Much more. 2. When the dog is empty, he has just done both outdoors in front of you and been rewarded. He may then and only then be loose in the house for 30 minutes or so in a dog-proofed area. If he is perfectly chew trained, you may choose to give him the whole house. This is an academic point at most dogs who require house training are probably untrained in other areas like chewing as well. If it's a new dog or puppy, don't presume he's okay because he has not yet taken out the dining room set. Presume he will chew virtually anything at any time. So don't let him discover his love of oak or oriental rugs. If he occasionally produces an addendum, pees or poops again within half an hour of being completely emptied, don't take the chance of this happening. Crate him for a couple of hours to get him to stretch and to prevent any accidents. Every accident inside is 1, one you weren't able to reward outside, and 2, one you failed to catch inside, which gets that habit rolling, or 3, one you caught inside, but which might set you up as a bad guy before your reward history has provided sufficient cushion for you to punish without screwing things up. Avoid mistakes indoors in early training at all costs. 3. Crate the dog except during supervised empty-free periods. Make the crate comfy and give him plenty to do in there in the form of chew toy puzzles. If you must leave the dog alone for more than a few hours on a regular basis, you cannot in all conscience crate him. It's hard to advise here, given that someone with so little availability has gone and acquired an unhouse-trained dog, a world-class stupid act, but here are the damage control measures for what it's worth. The dog will have to be left in a dog-proof room with a toilet area at the opposite end from the sleeping and eating area. The room should have a hard floor, like a kitchen floor, and the toilet area should be something porous, like a good thickness of newspaper or even better, turf. All this will maximize the likelihood of the dog choosing the right place when he needs to go. It in no way guarantees this, with no feedback happening every time. When you are home, you will do the rewarding as usual at the selected outdoor toilet location. Crating overnight is fine. I do recommend putting overnight crates in your bedroom. Sleeping in mass is very much a dog thing. If the dog wakes up early, whines, simply do not respond until 2 conditions have been met. 1. It's your rising time or later, and 2. Dog is quiet in the crate. Dogs learn quickly that there will be no action before a certain time. They estimate time very well, and that noise doesn't work. You may also reprimand noise making, although this will likely only stun the behavior temporarily. The extinction is what kills the whining. Be advised, a small reprimand function as an attention reward, now fluffy, mommy doesn't appreciate, or worse, shh, relax, is a reward. 4. When a reward history is well established in the outdoor toilet area, you may now set the dog up to make mistakes indoors. Deciding whether you have sufficient reward history to risk some punishments is a judgment call. Usually, an adequate reward history will be indicated by the fact that the dog will almost reflexively start eliminating as soon as he reaches the chosen site. Think in terms of a few days to a week or two, provided you have not been allowing mistakes to occur indoors during the same period. Sometimes, if you have been diligent with the reward part, the dog never even makes a boo-boo and you're off scot-free. In many cases, though, although the dog now has a preference for the toilet area, alternative toilets like the rugs have not necessarily been ruled out. To rule them out cleanly and efficiently, you must catch the initiation of the act. If the dog has completely emptied his bladder or bowels by the time you interrupted him, it is far less clear. If you are 2 behaviors late, the dog pees on the carpet, walks away and sighs, and then you reprimand, you guessed it, reprimanded sighing. It is not inherently obvious to dogs that there is anything emotionally charged about urinating on carpets as opposed to sighing, so stop thinking it's obvious when you're mad about. If you wish to modify behavior, keep up with the flow of behavior change. If the reward history was well executed, it will take between 1 and 3 reprimands indoors to finish the job. That is, if those are 2 or 3 in a row. If the dog sneaks out and which is not reprimanded, count on a more protracted struggle. This whole thing has nothing to do with dog stubbornness or other emotional content. It's a raw, unadulterated conditioning procedure that goes for leg-lifting males, unhouse trainable breeds, and any other classification you feel exempts your dog from the laws of learning. To condition an animal, all you need is a spinal cord and brainstem. Most dogs qualify. In leg-lifting males, the complicating factor is that there will be things which likely elicit urination, like novelty, the scent of other dogs, any vertical surface, etc. The procedure is the same, though. Establish a reward history, prevent mistakes, and finally, rule out wrong options. Once the dog has it down, reward outdoors occasionally. At this point, you may now consider sending the dog out rather than taking him out, as well as gradually extending his free periods in the house. Note, gradually. Training regressions. People are terribly mystified by any change in their dog's behavior and go on a lot with the why, as though there should never be any variability whatsoever in this living organism's behavior. Training regressions are a frequent occurrence and no big deal. It is so important to remember that behavior is always in flux, constantly subjected to whatever contingencies there are in the environment. In the case of behavior problems, there are 3 main reasons for behavior which seem to be fixed to break down again. 1. Undertraining. The behavior was never that strong in the first place. 2. Contingency changed. The behavior extinguished or another one was trained by the owner or environment. 3. Failure to generalize. This is Karen Pryor's new tank syndrome. These 3 reasons are really variations on the same theme, undertraining. It is extremely difficult in real life setting to reward enough trials to get the response strength most people expect. It is also hard to keep on top of changing circumstances to maintain training and get responses generalized across new context. Remember the first 12 urination attempts of Max? He was headed for chronic inverse house training. Let's say Max's next couple of dozen trials continue in similar fashion. Also, the door to the basement and bedrooms have been kept closed and Max is crated when the owners aren't home. This arrangement ends up with Max appearing to understand that he may only go in the yard. But how trained is Max? His safe options are now limited to the yard, which he has been consistently using. After a few weeks, the owner successfully leaves Max alone for brief periods uncrated. One day, Max's owner happens to go out to water a plant in the garden when Max goes out in the morning. The owner's presence nearby inhibits Max from going in the yard, so he comes back in with a full bladder. The owner wasn't paying attention and goes about his business. When he leaves the room, Max urinates on a baby blanket, the only poorest service available. No one says otherwise, so Max assumes this is okay. A new habit is born. This simple case of undertraining may have been interpreted by the owner as a jealousy of the baby or any number of silly interpretations. This case, in fact, wouldn't qualify as a training regression at all because the dog was never trained. The phenomena of a mass problem is at the root of a lot of punishment directed at dogs who supposedly know what they should do. People have a strong tendency to assume a very thorough knowledge on the part of the dog based on observations of some desired responses. The dog's understanding of contingencies is usually quite different from the owner's. What's the solution for Max then? 1. A solid history of rewarded trials in the desired location. 2. Prevent mistakes until number 1 is accomplished. 3. Rule out mistakes with setups when number 1 is accomplished. And 4. Maintain behavior with occasional reward. Be ever ready for regression if contingencies or context change. No magic potion. House train the dog. Contingency change. Inadvertent new rules. A contingency change might look like the following. The dog has learned about it's safe and often rewarding to urinate in the yard and dangerous in most places he has tried in the house, and so a fairly solid yard habit is in place. The owner has become upset about the yellowing of the grass from dog urine and has decided to limit the dog to eliminating in one corner of the yard. The owner takes the dog on leash at elimination times for a couple of weeks, always going to one corner and praising the dog for urinating. The first couple of times the dog goes out off leash, she urinates in the wrong area. The owner punishes the dog. On the third day, the dog will not urinate in the yard. The owner sees this and takes the dog for a walk. The dog has a very full bladder and finally urinates and is praised by the owner. The owner likes the idea of the dog urinating on the walk rather than in the yard and starts taking the dog around the block to eliminate, which is successful and keeps the yard urine-free. A few months later, the owner is in a rush to prepare for guests arriving, so lets the dog into the yard to pee while finishing the cooking. The dog does not urinate in the yard and comes back in full. When the guests arrive, the owner puts the dog on leash to calm one of the visitors who is afraid of dogs. The dog urinates on a Persian rug. The owner thinks the dog sensed that one of the guests didn't like her and urinated to demonstrate her resentment. In fact, the dog has learned to urinate when on leash only, based on the new contingencies inadvertently set up by the owner. Dogs aren't into big agendas. They just need to know where and when it's safe to pee. Elimination on command. Dogs fail to generalize across every facet of dog training. In this case of house training, lapses will occur on visits to other people's houses simply because the dog has learned not to eliminate in the owner's house but has not generalized to all indoor locations. Location, surface, and whoever is around are the cues dogs attend to do the most when it comes to house training. Some dogs are sensitive to weather as well. The best way around this is to put elimination on cue. People who frequent dogs shows have learned this trick because they must get dogs to eliminate in new locations and on odd surfaces on a daily basis. To teach this, first observe the dog for a few days to get a precise idea of when he does which function and specifically the intention behaviors which immediately precede elimination. Then start training as follows. Just before the dog urinates, give a urination command, wait while the dog urinates, and reward afterwards as usual. Do the same for defecation, using a different command. If the dog is thrown for a loop by your speaking just as he's about to pee, don't sweat it. Work to a nice sequence of command, behavior, reward. This is classical condition and will result after enough trials in a dog who will urine or defecate
In
on
early
command.
training, don't risk giving the cue unless you're sure he's about to go, because this results in a missed association. You need a sufficient number of trials under your belt before the cue will actually trigger any action. The key to this technique is recognizing the early signs of dog's intention to eliminate so that you can give the cue before the behavior. This technique also works without rewards. The best method is to selectively reward any eliminating that has preceded by the cue. When he goes without a command up front, simply thank him without giving him a reward. This will strengthen on-cue elimination in preference to off-cue. Taken to the extreme, this could produce a dog who has a hard time eliminating without the cue, so watch out. Dogs' underdeveloped ability to generalize can come in handy. For instance, dogs can be easily taught that it is okay to lie on this sofa in that chair, but not this other sofa in the other chair. This makes consistent no furniture at all rules unnecessary. I don't mean this as a value judgment in any way. If you don't want dogs on any furniture, that's fine too, provided you're provided a decent alternative. Comfort-wise for a dog who demonstrates a preference for furniture, otherwise the dog will likely earn when it's safe to lie on the sofa when you, the radar trap, are gone. What I'm saying is that it's not unfair or difficult for the dog to assimilate that some furniture is okay and some is not. Dogs discriminate tiny differences with great ease. In fact, they discriminate so well that it greatly complicates training in those instances where you want generalization. In all this, it's important to remember that the dog is not learning that he should or shouldn't do something or anything to do with right and wrong. He's learning about contingencies, like what are the immediate results to him of doing this, that, or the other thing. Repeat to yourself as a mantra, dogs don't learn right versus wrong. They learn safe versus dangerous. This doesn't make dogs less sophisticated or valuable than if they moralized about it either. It's simply how they are. Non-static nature of behavior. People get very shirty about training regressions. Once the dog has demonstrated understanding of a rule or gotten into habit, many people presume some deeply personal motivation must be at the root of a breakdown. The truth is that behavior falls apart all the time. Often you will never know why. This goes for carefully trained in behavior which seems under pretty tight environmental control. Professional figure skaters quite regularly fall on their butts without an inquisition into why being set up. Agonizing about why a dog makes a boo-boo is interesting over coffee but doesn't solve the problem. Behavior is in constant flux. There is never a finished product. Retraining or touch-up training is part of the process. Experienced trainers understand this and take dips in stride. A useful tip is to not take long-established behavior for granted. Even 9-year-old dogs need to hear at least an occasional congratulatory mumble when they make wee-wee in exactly the right place yet again. My dog Lassie is becoming more of a world-class expert at wee-wee with each passing year. Barking. Dogs bark for a variety of reasons. 1. Watchdog barking serves the dual purpose of alerting other pack members that there is an intruder or change in the environment and warning the intruder that they have been noticed. Dogs bark much more than their ancestors, wolves, who hardly ever bark. In domesticating them, we have selected for more barking. The predisposition to watchdogs bark, or bark threshold, varies among breeds and individuals. The modifying principles are the same, though. Whether you're trying to coax a little more barking out of a couch potato, Newfoundland, or tone down barking in a hair-triggered German Shepherd or a miniature Schnauzer. 2. Request barking is the dog's way of communicating to the owner that he would like something now. It's a behavioral experiment by the dog, kind of a let's see what this produces. Typical requests including door opening or yard access service attention, handouts from your plate, the owner returns from an absence, being let out of a crate or confinement area, invitations to play and access to the dog across the street. This behavior is a problem not because the dog tries out the experiment, but because the experiment usually succeeds. The owner rewards the barking by granting the request and habit is born. 3. Spooky barking occurs when the dog is fearful or uncomfortable about something in the environment and barks to help increase social distance. It's the dog's way of saying, "I don't come any closer." This is much more serious than garden variety watchdog barking because the dog in question is advertising that he is under-socialized and therefore potentially dangerous if approached. 4. Boredom barking can result when the dog's daily need for exercise and social mental stimulation aren't met. The dog barks compulsively because of boredom. This is very much like pacing back and forth, tail chasing, or self-mutilation. Dogs left outdoors in yards get into this one a lot. Controlling excessive barking. The goal of any bark training is usually to limit the number of barks per sequence and sometimes to limit the number of contexts in which the dog erupts. Addressing the underlying issue of undersocialization and insufficient exercise and stimulation are also crucial. So first, identify what kind of barking you've got and refer to the instructions which follow. Watchdog barking, the goal is to limit the number of barks per sequence by teaching the dog the meaning of the words bark and quiet, or any word you want to use as an off switch. First, you have to teach the dog to both bark and stop on command as a trick for a reward like a treat. To elicit the barking so that you can practice, you must use something you know makes the dog bark, like the doorbell or a weird noise outside. You may require a helper for this. Arrange the following sequence of events. 1. Your command, bark. 2. The doorbell or other prompt, bark elicitor. 3. Barking from the dog. 4. Praise from you, good, wonderful, after a few barks. 5. Your command, quiet. 6. Show the dog the treat. 7. The dog's
eventually, distraction from barking by the tree. 8. 3 to 5 seconds of quiet during which you praise. Good, quiet. 9. Give him the treat after the 3 to 5 seconds of perfect quiet. 10. Do it again from 1 and gradually extend the length of time of the quiet up to a minute or 2. Do it over and over till the dog knows the game. It may take a few sessions, so hang in there. How do you judge whether he knows the game? He knows the game when he barks on command and doesn't need the doorbell anymore, and he quiets on the first quiet command but without having to be shown the treat. You still give him one from your pocket or from the cupboard if he quiets on command. You just don't show it up front anymore. If he ever interrupts a quiet time with even a muffled bark or two, give him a no reward mark such as, "Oh, too bad," and start counting the quiet time from the beginning again. He has to know that barking during the quiet time was a mistake that cost him his treat. You have to acquire the ability to yo-yo the dog back and forth reliably between bark and quiet in training sessions before you try out your quiet command in real situations. Barking is deeply compulsive for many dogs, and you've got to build them up to actual visitor trials. The most common mistake is trying to use the quiet command before it's well enough conditioned in training sessions. Think of quiet on command as a muscle you're making stronger. The more practice, the stronger the muscle. When you can turn barking on and off anytime, any place as a trick, you've conditioned a strong muscle. In other words, you may now start practicing the quiet command when the dog barks on his own in real-life situations. The first couple of times the dog will respond poorly to the command, so you have to be ready. Have really good treats handy and go back to showing him the treat up front if necessary. Another option, although a tricky one, is to reprimand the failure to quiet. The best way to do this is, when the dog ignores your nicely conditioned quiet command, to flatten him with the growliest, loudest, "I said quiet," you can muster. Even better, get every human present to simultaneously do this. When he quiets, become sweet again as though nothing untoward had happened. Good, quiet. Practice makes perfect. Remember, quiet on command is a muscle that will get flabby if you don't train. A good adjunct for fuel-injected, turbocharged barkers is to teach them downstay as well as quiet. To earn their treat, they must hold a stay on a mat near the door and keep their mouths buttoned for the full duration of the period. The hardest thing about bark training is how futile it seems the first couple of times you try, either in a training session or during your first real-life dry run. It's also the most interesting thing about this training because no matter how bad it seems to go the first time or two, it gets better rapidly if you persevere. Many people never get over the hump. The best thing to do is thoroughly understand the instructions and simply practice with a zen-like resolve, because this procedure works if you give it a critical mass of training. If your dog has a very low threshold going off for the smallest sound and changes in the environment, it would help the cause to get him better habituated. Take him out more and invite the world in to visit more often. Expose him to a wider range of sights and sounds. It's not particularly fun to be on a chronic yellow or red alert the way these dogs are. Examine your own behavior and make sure you are not inadvertently reinforcing the little tyke by soothing, like rewarding, him or giving him attention whenever he explodes into a barking frenzy. Request barking when they want something. Dogs will experiment with various behaviors to see if any of them work. They quickly figure out that barking works with humans. If you don't like barking, stop rewarding it with attention, door opening services, releasing from crates, etc. Period. No buts. Rather than the dog telling you when to take him out at regular intervals. Always make sure that none of them are preceded by barking. Never let a barking dog out of the crate or confinement area. Always wait for a lull of 30 seconds or so. Ignore dogs who bark at you. Keep in mind that if you have been rewarding it for a while, the barking will get worse before it goes away. You're changing the rules and the dog will be frustrated at first. The behavior going away is called extinction, and the intensifying of the behavior before it goes away is called an extinction burst. We have extinction bursts all the time too. When your demagnetized credit card doesn't function when the store clerk runs it through the machine, she doesn't give up immediately and starts manually punching the number in. She runs the card through a few more times, usually each time more vigorously than the last, or else runs the card through a different speed, or even varies the pressure against different parts of the machine. The radical shift in behavioral strategy, in this case to tedious manual dialing and number punching, occurs after the card running behavior extinguishes with a typical extinction burst. All that vigorous swishing of your card and its variations was the extinction burst. Likewise, your dog will not immediately abandon barking as a strategy, not without a fight anyways. Like the store clerk who has a strong history of being rewarded with completed transactions by running cards through scanners, your dog has had a history of being rewarded by barking. He will lean a little harder before he switches behavioral strategies. The quintessential extinction burst is found in the elevator versus stairs analogy. When you step into an elevator and push the button for your floor, the button should light up, the door should close, and the elevator should start moving. Your button pushing behavior gets a nice, boring reward history. What happens then if the light doesn't go on, the door stays open, and the elevator remains grounded? Do you immediately leap out and take the stairs? No, you push the button again, harder, with rapid fire bursts, with a battering ram if you have one on you. Then you take the stairs. So when dogs escalate their crate whining or barking when you stop rewarding it, say to yourself, he's pushing the button harder before he switches to the stairs. What makes this a bit more wrinkly is that very often in real life, variations in intensity or delivery offered during the extinction burst are rewarded either deliberately or by chance and end up getting trained in. This is a tragedy of large portions for dog owners. Rather than just having crate barking now, you might have crate screaming or crate barking with digging in corner. When you used extinction as a tool, be fully conscious and prepared to make Rover go cold turkey. Wait for a strategy shift that you like, such as lying quietly, before rewarding with the approach and crate door opening. Above all, notice and paying attention to the dog when he's quiet, something we all forget to do. Failing to do so is using extinction, one of the most powerful tools in training to get rid of our favorite behavior, dog lying quietly providing doggy ambience. Dogs found out that a strategy shift to laundry stealing or pawing guests or barking gets attention much more reliably. Teach your dog that there are payoffs for lying quietly, chewing his own chew toys, and refraining from barking. Everyone could stand to cultivate a knee-jerk, good, quiet, reflex for those instances where the dog might have barked and didn't. Barking when alone was discussed in alone training. It can be thought of as a common form of request barking. The dog is requesting that you come back. To summarize how to get rid of it, don't let the dog shadow you around so much when you're at home. Lock him in various rooms away from you to practice semi-absences. Reprimand or ignore any barking which ensues. Ignoring is actually the more powerful tool. If you try for a quick, temporary fix by reprimanding it, burst through the door, scold the dog, and then immediately disappear again, closing the door behind you. Remember that he's barking to get you back. With some dogs, a reprimand is better than nothing, so you may be rewarding him. Practice zillions of brief absences every day. Go out and come back in after a few seconds over and over to get the dog desensitized to your departures. Do it in a matter-of-fact way, ignoring the dog whatever he does. Then do outings of 10 seconds, 30, a minute, 10 minutes, etc. Mix it up. Dogs need abundant proof that your departure doesn't predict a traumatically long period of isolation. Keep all your departures and arrivals low-key. Never make an entrance when the dog is barking. Wait for a 30-second lull. Increase mental stimulation in the form of training and predatory games. Make him work for his food. Hide it around the house before you leave, or stuff it into Kongs and hide those. Tire him out physically before long absences. Make him bring a toy to you when you come home to provide a focus for the nervous energy. Another type of request barking which needs to be mentioned is talking back. The dog barking at you when you attempt to reprimand him. This barking is a combination of displacement of low-grade anxiety. You've interrupted something he really wants to be doing right now with your mildish punishment and you in which army experiment. It's vital that you make your point at this cusp. Remember that game where you and your buddy put your hands above each other on the way up a baseball bat as a kind of one-upsmanship thing? When you reprimand the dog and he talks back, it is a similar minor escalation. You must not escalate only one more notch. You must escalate so suddenly and so far up into orbit that the dog will think twice about ever playing this game again. You're going to use punishment here, and of course, it will buy you what punishment always buys, a temporary suppression of the behavior.
Into this temporary void opened by the punishment, you will actively install another, more likable behavior. Remember that the dog isn't learning that it was wrong to do what he was doing. He is learning that it is dangerous. So make it clearly dangerous by really going into orbit. This means throwing an extremely intense, scary-looking tantrum in front of the dog. Go as berserk as you can, stopping short of touching the dog. Then, soon after you psychologically flatten the dog for talking back, set up the original scenario and reward an alternative behavior choice. For example, if the dog was excavating a plant and starts barking at you when you try to reprimand him, go utterly ballistic, growling and screaming at the heavens, sending a book flying into the wall. Don't worry if you scare the dog. That is the point. He should seem very impressed, slinking around and or sucking up. Wait a couple of minutes, then make up by asking him to come over and sit. After making up, allow him near the plant again and thank him for ignoring it. Or, better yet, direct him to one of his own toys or dissection objects. All this, of course, begs the question, what was the untrained dog doing in an area that's not dog-proofed? It will, of course, occasionally happen that a dog who seemed trained makes a boo-boo, like that. If this is happening all the time, however, basic chew training needs to be addressed, whatever the age, breed, or previous history of the dog is. This dog hasn't a clue and it's behaving like, guess what, a dog. If you will remember from Chapter 4, plants are chew toys. Spooky barking in this case is always important to get at the underlying under-socialization. Prevention is the easiest socialization puppies extensively to as a wide and variety of people and dogs as possible. You cannot overdo it. Expose them to plenty of places, experiences, sights, and sounds, and make it all fun with praise, games, and treats galore. Find and attend a reward-oriented puppy class. Socialization is covered in detail in Chapter 3. If you miss the boat socializing the puppy, you'll have to do remedial work with the adolescent or adult. Whatever your dog is spooky about must now become associated with lunch. This is how under-socialized dogs work for their food. If he doesn't like strangers, meals need to be flipped to him and eventually hand-fed to him by strangers until he improves. If he's spooky about traffic, hand-feed him his meals on the sidewalk, one handful each time a car passes. It takes a while to re-socialize adults, so be patient. Above all, prevent problems by blitzing it with puppies. Boredom barking. If you don't have time for a dog, don't get a dog. If you have an outside dog, do whatever house training, chew training, and obedience training it takes to make him an inside dog. There are very few guarantees in behavior, but one is surely this. Dogs chained out in yards, self-conditioned to bark, dig, and lunge. Boredom barking is just a symptom of gross understimulation. What's needed is a radical increase in interesting stuff in the dog's life. Increased training, walks, socialization, and predatory games. Only when that is accomplished would you do a bark and quiet protocol, as is described under watchdog barking. Jumping up. A classic culture clash example is greeting rituals. In most human cultures, we shake hands or bow. In dog culture, they buzz around excitedly, lick and sniff each other. The origin of jumping up is in infancy. Puppies will jump up to lick the corners of adult dogs' mouths, which triggers the latter to regurgitate food that the puppies can eat. This jumping up and licking behavior is retained in adulthood as a submissive greeting. It's exaggerated when dogs live with humans because the social group is continually being fractured, then reunited. We leave and come back a lot, necessitating constant broad rituals. We're also vertical. The dog wants to get at our face. We also tend to let tiny puppies get away with it and then change rules when they commit the crime of growling. Jumping up isn't inevitable. The main reason dogs jump is that no one has taught them to do otherwise. I'm not talking about punishments like kneeing dogs, pinching their feet, or cutting off their air with a strangle collar. This sort of abuse has been the prevailing treatment, but is inefficient, laden with side effects and inhumane. Imagine yourself being kneed in the diaphragm or pushed over backwards for smiling or extending your hand in friendship. It's not the fault of the dogs that their cultural norm is at odds with our greeting preferences. The key in training dogs not to jump up is so strongly train an alternative behavior which is mutually exclusive to jumping. It's called counter-conditioning. The dog cannot jump up and sit at the same time, nor can he dig through walls while working on a chew toy.
lie on a mat and food solicit from dinner guests simultaneously, or chase cars while maintaining eye contact. The applications of this technique are limitless. Counter conditioning can be used on its own or in conjunction with other techniques. It uses its virtually mandatory if you plan to use punishment. Punishment used on its own will get you that temporary suppression, if it works at all. Without an alternative behavior trained in to fill the void, you will sooner or later be back to the square one. Think of the punishment as buying you time to get a more desired behavior trained in. That said, counter conditioning works marvelously without any punishment whatsoever, and you get to avoid all those nasty side effects. I personally much prefer to be the good guy. Counter conditioning comes up in child rearing too. Rather than simply punishing toddlers for throwing Wedgwood off the coffee table and again for writing on the walls with magic markers, and then once more for putting a pencil in the dog's ear, we give them things to occupy them and keep the Wedgwood out of reach till they were trustworthy. The message is, please color in your coloring book, watch Sesame Street, or play Nintendo, rather than a never-ending series of don'ts. It is a given that children need something to pass their time or else they're going to get into trouble, and it's exactly the same with dogs. Dogs are also much more likely than kids to guess wrong about what are appropriate pastimes and ways to behave around humans because they are an even more foreign species than 2-year-old kids are, which is saying something. The behavior you choose as your competing behavior must be one that physically cannot occur at the same time. Do not, for instance, teach barking to be counter-conditioned food soliciting. It will probably result in a dog who now food solicits with barks rather than drools and stares. Teach down stay on a mat away from the table instead. You often have to practice the new behavior up to a pretty reliable level in a couple of training sessions before trying to bring it into the real-life context. In the case of jumping up, the dog should have at least a rudimentary sit and stay before attempting to use this as a counter condition to a strong compulsion like jumping up. So first, practice sit-stay for food rewards in a variety of locations, especially those places where the jump-ups take place, such as the front door area and on the street. Details on how to teach commands are in Chapter 6. When the dog is an ace at sit-stay and low distraction, you will now teach him not to jump on you and other family members at high-risk times. You will start by setting him up. Open your arms wide, pat your thighs, and do everything you can to make it look as though you want him to jump on you. Really ask for it. As soon as you get it, reject him totally with a no reward mark. This is simply a signal that tells the dog he guessed wrong and has zero chance of getting a reward for that behavior. Or oh, too bad, and their other uses will be covered in detail in Chapter 5. Quick timing helps. If you initiate your mark as soon as the front feet rise off the ground, it is infinitely clearer to the dog that if you start saying then he's taken his feet off the ground, lifted them 1 meter high, and landed them on the front of your body. That's sluggish training. You may teach him eventually, but it'll take you a lot more repetitions, and I mean a lot. So pay attention after you quickly mark a couple of jump attempts. He will probably try something else on your invitation. A lot of dogs will simply sit. If he doesn't, you may suggest it. As soon as he does, praise very enthusiastically, pat him, and give him a treat from your pocket. Then do it again. Practice until you can't get the dog to jump on you no matter what you do. At this point, your jump up invitation is becoming an alternative command for sit. Neat, hey? Not only does this drive the point home to control the impulse to jump, but it prepares the dog for those unavoidable idiots who will sabotage your training by asking for or allowing your dog to jump up on them. If 1 person in 10 allows or encourages your dog to jump, the behavior will remain alive, so prepare your dog for this actively with the anti-jump exercise. Dogs learn remarkably quickly to not jump on you in the first training session. What they don't necessarily learn is not to jump on you tomorrow either, or when you're upstairs, or when it's another person. This poor generalization is characteristics of dog learning. Get used to it. Luckily, the session is quick and each subsequent retrain even quicker, so just buckle down and proceed to cover all the bases. The best way to do this is by using troubleshooting sessions. Troubleshooting. Once the dog has had that bit of priming, arrange a simulated guest greeting session with a few friends. Each one will ring the doorbell, come in, and do the anti-jump exercise on the dog. As soon as they get a refusal to jump, they reward the dog with a warm greeting and food from their pocket. If the dog lunges back up to help with the greeting or treat collection, they will give a no reward mark and cancel the reward till he's sitting again. All rewards of warmth and food must be collected in the sit position. Then the same person goes out the door and comes in again and repeats the exercise. Do 10 re-entries. With each success trial, the dog's performance improves because of A, practice, and B, decreased level excitement. After a few trials, the dog sits without jumping and usually without being told to sit. Carry on through to re-entry number 10 anyway. Think of the new behavior as a muscle and the training as having a weightlifting effect. The more repetitions, the stronger and more toned the muscle. Behaviorist extraordinaire Ian Dunbar suggests an actual party as a troubleshooting setup, with repeated entries by guests made necessary by storing the beer outside. This provides a bonus in the form of socialization to humans at various degrees of intoxication. After person 1 has done their 10 reps, the next person does the same thing. What you will find is that the dog had never experienced training and is off the wall jumping all over the novel person. Failure to generalize again. However, it will take fewer repetitions this time to achieve the final product of a sit to greet without any preliminary jumping. Go to 10 reps anyway. You're playing the same game the dog has perfected once. Then, do another 10 with a third person. By the time half a dozen people have done the exercise, the dog will probably be sitting without jumping and without command for novel people. You can't make it fall apart now, or can you? Wait 24 or 48 hours and try again and you'll have another regression. This is an example of a spontaneous recovery. The dog, throughout an individual troubleshooting session, habituates to the visitor's arrival until sit to greet is achievable due to his lowered excitement level. The excitement and jumping up recovers in the interval between sessions, but that's part of the process. The learning rate in your second session will be accelerated. Now the dog takes 1 or 2 trials for person number 1 and by person 3 has remembered the game. You're seeing light at the end of the tunnel. The ideal way to do this is to train with 3 or 4 people to the level of a non-jumping instant sit, wait 48 hours, and do another training session with fresh people. You may need a 3rd or 4th session, but a lot of dogs become sit maniacs after only 2 blitzes. Then you can reward occasionally and schedule a brief refresher session if you get a regression. End of problem. People may be overwhelmed at the thought of all that work. Training is such an inherently fascinating endeavor that I have trouble relating to this. It's like saying it's so much work to eat a 12-course gourmet meal. I'm constantly puzzled by people who like dogs enough to buy one yet find it a chore to interact with one in the most interesting way. Training. A troubleshooting session is fun and takes no time at all. Part of the problem with this, or any technique which does not bear instant fruit, is that the trainer fizzles out before the critical mass of trials is completed and says, "Oh, I tried that and it didn't work." If you didn't get to critical mass, you didn't do troubleshooting. This technique works every time if you don't quit too soon. Then you can have a lifetime of coasting if you wish. If you still find yourself underendowed with the energy to train, i.e. don't care what the dog does as long as behaviors X, Y, or Z are eliminated right now, you are probably stretched way too thin to do a decent job educating a dog. It is my overwhelming experience that owners who absolutely demand fast fixes to undesired behaviors need to downgrade from organic to plush animals. Dogs are time intensive and not for everybody. It is a huge privilege to own one, and we've got to start feeling some obligation to do right by them. It's a turnaround experience for the trainer to get a success with a technique like troubleshooting. No matter how good it looks on paper, and this one looks very good on paper, the owner must experience for himself the initial bout of effort, some "this isn't working" feelings, and the final success at the end. It makes one a believer in a much keener trainer. Experienced trainers forget what it feels like to not know where a process is headed. Green trainers must train very much on faith. Food stealing. Dogs are programmed to be opportunistic. It is edible and within reach. Hell, eat it as fast as possible. This is tricky to live with in most households. Counter-conditioning is, again, the technique of choice. Let's look at jumping on the kitchen counter when food is being prepared. In this case, the only priming necessary would be a fast session or two of down stay on a designated mat in the kitchen. Then I would wade right in and train during actual meal preparation times for subsequent sessions. These would be extended preparation times because you're training, but worth it. The dog learns that the best way to score a tidbit is to hold position on the mat. Reward him every 10 seconds for the first couple of rewards, then every 20, then 30, and so on. You can use his own dinner. It sure beats giving it to him for free in a bowl. Every time he leaves the mat, you pin a no reward mark on it and then escort him back to the mat. As in anti-jump training, the trainer's timing makes a big difference in how quickly progress is made. Catching him after he has risen, left the mat, and walked several steps is a light year behind catching the first muscle contraction or intention to break the stay. An experienced trainer can do this and do a reasonable job preparing the meal at the same time. A green trainer will need to budget a fair amount of attention on the dog. This is why, for a few days, meal preparation times will be extended to allow for the concurrent training session. The dog learns that if he breaks the stay, he's going to be put back anyway, but if he holds the stay on his own, he has a fair chance for rewards. When the dog has it down, he will stay the entire meal preparation time for his one reward at the end. You may need, after this initial bout of training, to add a sting-style setup to this, if the dog makes a go for the counter when you leave the room. Bear in mind that there is no big agenda on the part of the dog. He's simply learning the safe, dangerous discrimination again, just as we learn the safe, dangerous speed trap discrimination when driving on the highway. You will only make yourself miserable if you agonize about him knowing that it's wrong. Teach the dog that it is always dangerous to try going on the counter. To achieve this, you really must catch the first trial, his first experiment at sneaking his behavior in which you're absent. So rather than having spontaneously spring the behavior on him when you're not ready with your very best timing, spring it on him by setting him up. This is the classic sting operation. Once your downstay on the mat is nicely conditioned, deliberately leave something tempting on the counter and exit the room nonchalantly. But you're spying, you're ready, you're Clint Eastwood saying, "Make my day." As soon as the dog contracts a muscle to leave the mat, burst back in and force your downstay. If you do this a couple of times, the dog simply incorporates the clause that Big Brother is always watching. So his best chance of scoring rewards is by staying on the mat whether you're in the room or not. The problem occurs when people do not initiate training until the dog has already succeeded a few times in stealing food. Now you have a dog with a reward history for counter jumping. You're swimming upstream because no matter what you do, the behavior has been reinforced. This results in efforts by your dog to figure out when it's safe to do this behavior. It's obviously safe and rewarding sometimes. His successful attempts have told him that. In other words, you've made him motivated by letting him get away with one or worse, two or more. Your solution stings operations will have to be repeated many more times in the case of a previously successful dog. The smart thing to do is to plan ahead and set up your sting for the first trial. You can safely assume that because you own a dog and dogs are opportunists, your dog will try to counter jump if there is food there. So be good and ready for this. It's no tragedy that he tried. It is a huge tragedy if he succeeds once and then you start training. Do your counter conditioning and then set up your sting operations prophylactically. We know he's going to try, so catch the first experiment. This way you get the imprint first trial rather than food stealing getting the imprint. Above all, don't shackle yourself with useless laments about right and wrong. The dog will not generalize your kitchen counter regimen to hours devours on the coffee table, ice cream cones in kids' hands, etc. So be prepared to set things up before you have a problem. It's perplexing to trainers the way many dog owners wait until they have an entrenched problem before doing anything. The reason is the misguided expectation that good dogs don't do things like steal food or jump up. This is the thinking that has to go. It is a cultural norm for dogs to engage in many of our most despised behavior problems, and therefore the onus is on us to educate dogs. Top 10 predictable behaviors which owners consider problems yet rarely do any preventative training for. 1. Reflexively pulling on leash. 2. Jumping up as greeting. 3. Indiscriminate chewing of all matter. 4. Eating any food within reach. food stealing. 5. Distress vocalization when socially isolated or confined. 6. Interest in members of own species. 7. Cannot be handled or groomed easily. 8. Fear of strangers and biting strangers. 9. Resource guarding. And 10. Chasing and biting moving objects, rough play with children.